The continent of Lauren has entered its second age due to the gradual decline of dragons. Many believe the giant worms, fed up with being pestered in their caves by foolish knights, migrated east to the shores beyond the abyssal ocean. Others believe they traveled to another plane of existence entirely. Either way, the people of Lauren are happy to be rid of such terrible creatures. Most of them, anyway. There are still a few sightings of the fire-breathing lizards roaming the skies here and there, but their numbers are so small seeing one is considered a rarity, and even a sign of good luck, if you can believe it. Despite the overwhelming joy from the mass exodus of dragons, a new problem arose in their absence. When the beasts left, they willfully abandoned their treasures. Caves filled to the brim with gold, magically imbued artifacts, and ancient tombs containing dark forbidden magic were ripe for the taking. Such riches could turn a mere peasant into a king or a mighty sorcerer. With such wealth and power at stake, the rulers of the land were quick to seize upon the assets of their once terrifying neighbors. Several wars erupted within the country as kingdoms vied for the vast hordes of dragon lairs. The country slipped into chaos as kingdoms fell and rose at the flip of a dime, leaving the average citizen to fend off for themselves against local monster raids. Powerful mages would practice their knowledge of forbidden magic on unsuspecting common folk, creating armies of undead to serve them in the wilderness. The dragons were gone, yet the land of Lauren was still burning. It was as if the dragons knew what would happen if they left their riches behind. It was their final revenge against the ones who forced them to leave their homes. Nearly 100 years have passed since that event, and the land of Lauren has made a strong recovery. The continent is rich with abundant resources. Its terrain is diverse with several biomes marking the land and various ecosystems teeming with life, some of which are still quite dangerous. In the land of Lauren, there is much opportunity to be had by those willing enough to risk their safety in search of fortune and notoriety. Many young people have taken it upon themselves to explore the unknown regions of the world in search of adventure, gold, and glory. Two such adventurers, separated at youth, now find themselves reminiscing about their younger years.
And remember when I told you we were gonna play hide and seek? And then I gave you that massive wedgie while you were still counting?
Risa was a larger than average griffin, standing around 6'4", wearing a mixed set of leather and plate armor made her that much more intimidating in person. Beyond her armor, she wore a pair of burgundy silk pants and a fitted tan tunic cut around the midriff, just inches above a blue-dyed sash wrapped around her waist. She completed her outfit with a dark green hooded cloak, with a grey emblem of 3 talon marks running across the back. She snorted before drinking another sip of ale and smiled. Her yellow beak complemented her white, pristine head and neck feathers. Along her neck was a distinct scar that ran up from her collarbone, a visible reminder of her recklessness while just a chick. The griffiness grabbed her sides, doubling over the table in laughter. She was too drunk to realize that she had accidentally used her outside voice instead of her inside voice, much to her friend's embarrassment. But, to be honest, even if she wasn't drunk, she probably wouldn't have really cared either.
Oh, yeah. Of course I remember. You really got me. I don't think I was able to sit down properly for a week after that.
Tanya blushed as several nearby patrons laughed at the griffin's outburst. She did her best to ignore them, and nervously laughed along, not wanting to spoil what had originally been a nice evening catching up with her best friend, up until the griffin's 5th tankard of ale. She was dressed in a light brown mage's robe, with similar matching trousers and dark brown boots. In front of her, a small book sat open on the table, revealing an index of various magic spells and enchantments. Her long pointed beak trailed out from behind the hood of her robes, while the rest of her facial features were obscured from prying eyes, aside from a pair of black feathered hands tapping nervously on her glass of wine. As a magpie, she only stood as high as the griffin's chest and was only somewhat muscular. A small dagger was strapped to her waist, seemingly the only weapon she had. Risa blew one of her frost-tipped feather bangs out of her yellow golden eyes before continuing with the humiliating display.
Oh yeah, that's right. You were walking funny and everything. I remember giving you a nickname after that one, too. What was it again? Something about, Oh yeah! It was from that lame underwear brand you used to always wear.
Risa snapped her clawed talons in an attempt to remember. Her eyes sparkled under the candlelight as they darted every so often to the corners of the room to check her surroundings. Tanya's blush deepened as she shrank in her seat from the overwhelming embarrassment. She repeated her old nickname to Risa in the lowest tone possible.
It was Starbutt.
Oh hey, you remembered. Good old Starbutt. Just be glad I decided not to spank you too. Otherwise, you would have really been seeing stars.
Risa slapped her friend on the shoulder playfully, while taking another swig of her ale before finally settling down.
Yeah, I really lucked out, huh?
Tanya rolls her eyes.
You were quite the prankster back then. Honestly, though, I wish you'd gone a little bit easier on me with all those wedgies when we were younger. I mean, you destroyed so many of my underpants when we were kids. I started running out of unstretched pairs. I literally had to use some of my own allowance to go purchase new undergarments on the weekends. Ugh. But with all that said, you haven't tried anything like that since my arrival. I'm actually kind of impressed to see that you've moved on beyond such childish pranks. I suppose you've really matured, huh?
Risa teasingly glanced at Tanya with a smugly intimidating smile.
Well, hold on a minute. Who said I've moved on? The night is still young, my friend. Oh, and I bet you're still rocking some pretty nerdy undies, if your taste in underwear hasn't changed much since we were kids.
The highly intoxicated Griffin leaned over the table and lowered her voice, moving in closer and closer with each word.
You know, it really has been a while since I've given you a proper flossing, Tanya. If you ask me, I'd say you're way past due.
Tanya leaned back slightly. A growing sense of dread slowly built inside her.
So, how about I pull those dorky little panties of yours for old time's sake?
Risa looked over at a few of the patrons eyeing them from across the bar before resting her eyes back on Tanya. She stared the magpie dead in the eye, only inches from her beak, making her casual threat that much more convincing.
And we give everyone here a little show before I plaster those bad boys over your face. Sound like a plan to you?
Tanya's eyes widened. Knowing Risa, there was a fairly good chance that she was being completely serious. She stammered a bit, crossing her legs and nervously tapping her talons on the table.
Really, Risa, there's no need for such childish roughhousing. You can't just... I mean, I'm not just gonna let... I won't... You... Fine.
Tanya realized nothing was going to stop her friend from doing something once she had her mind set to it. The magpie cursed under her breath.
Me and my big beak. Can we at least wait till we're not in public anymore? I mean, we're not exactly kids or teenagers anymore. You'd at least give me that courtesy, right?
The large griffiness grinned mischievously and continued to stare her friend down for another moment, before finally breaking character and succumbing to another laughing fit.
Oh man, you totally believed me. I can't believe you thought I'd actually do that. Well, again, anyway. Girl, why would I be interested in yanking your probably 3-day-old panties when instead I could be making you an offer that could make us both rich?
I'll have you know that I shower on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
Tanya crossed her arms and outright distaste for the joke. That said, at least Risa hadn't been serious about humiliating her in front of an entire tavern. She definitely lucked out this time around. Suddenly, Tanya narrowed her eyes and looked back at the large griffin. Something she said caught the magpie's attention. After a moment of silence, she finally opened her beak to speak.
Risa, this better be a legal venture. I'm not doing anything that breaks the law. My mage's guild, and not to mention my father, would be furious if I did.
Risa rolled her eyes.
Oh, spare me. Like the local man dress convention is an ethical gauge of legality in these parts. I've heard of the things your fellow members get into. Necromancy, cult murders, black magic, curses. The list goes on. I mean, no offense, but you guys aren't really standing on the moral high ground here. Not that I'm complaining. If there weren't rogue mages out creating armies of dead folk, then rangers like me would suddenly find ourselves out of the job. But to answer your question, yes, it's legal. Kinda.
Risa looked over to one side and avoided her friend's growing frown.
Oh, please, Risa. You know very well that the guild is one of the only entities that provides money for the capture and neutralization of rogue magic users. Plus, the Mages Guild strictly forbids those sorts of practices. Guild members face severe punishments just for dabbling in that sort of nonsense.
Sure, Tanya. And the king only uses our tax money for defense of the kingdom.
Risa shook her head incredulously as she took another large drink from her tankard. Tanya rolled her eyes with a smirk at the ranger's snarky response. The two aspiring adventurers may not have agreed on everything, but she couldn't deny that the two of them often worked quite well as a team.
Okay, this isn't getting us anywhere. What sort of job are you offering?
A heist. Of sorts. A dragon heist, to put it bluntly.
Risa gave the mage a cheesy grin and crossed her arms, quite proud of her ingenious plan, as she waited for the magpie to respond. Tanya raised an eyebrow at the ranger inquisitively.
A dragon. Like a fire-breathing dragon? Wait, you don't mean that one dragon nestled in the mountains, do you? The one that lives dead center in the middle of Knoll territory?
Mm-hmm. The very same. They say it lives west of here, about 120 miles downstream. It's nestled in the ruins of that old abandoned keep, past the swamplands. There's word going around that this dragon has a magically imbued item that she carries around with her at all times during the day, and that she only stores it away when sleeping. Rumor tells of it being lightweight and made of gold. It could literally set us up for the rest of our lives. Or until next week, pending we have any debts we need to pay. Either way.
And you want to risk a multitude of gruesome, painful deaths for just one item? Surely there must be more than just that.
Well, there is a slight personal reason. Two, really. One, word is, this item allows its wearer to transform into the form of a dragon. Two, it's very possible the item in question is in fact the dragon's panties.
Tanya cocked her eyebrow even higher. She opened her beak to speak, but only a confused sound came out. Gathering her wits, she shook her head and stated what she was originally going to say.
So, you want to steal this dragon's underpants. So, let me make sure I'm getting this right. You want me to join you on a high-stakes, life-endangering anti-raid?
Risa was still wearing her stupid cheesy grin as if she knew this was to be a bad idea, but just couldn't resist the bait.
Yup. Just think about what that would do for your notoriety. Who can say they've ever done a panty raid on a dragon before? Pretty original, eh? Never mind the fact you'd gain a powerful transformation spell out of it. And if it so happens that the whole part about dragon transmutation turns out to be false, then we can still loot her hoard and gain some notoriety that way. Plus, all the gold, of course. On top of that, I'll bet her lair has plenty of books and interesting magic stuff in it too. Might just learn a new spell or two. You mage types are always sticking your faces into dusty old books, so I'm sure that'll be a plus.
Tanya hummed quietly as she milled the idea over in her head. She remained silent for nearly a minute as she tapped her talons rapidly on the table, something she usually only did whenever she was nervous or pondering something serious. Finally, she opened her beak and spoke.
I will accompany you to the dragon's lair on 2 conditions.
Risa nearly shot out of her chair in surprise. The ranger hadn't expected the magpie to accept her invitation so quickly.
Really? I mean, yes?
1. Any and all tomes, books, historical artifacts, and items containing magical properties that we find in her lair go with me to my guild.
Risa tried to stifle a giggle as she couldn't help but ask.
Does that include her underwear?
Tanya narrowed her eyes in annoyance, but nevertheless replied with a curt nod.
If any of them appear to be from an ancient civilization or are found to be imbued with some sort of strange spell, then yes, you can keep the ones you are seeking, however.
Okay. What's the second condition then?
Tanya smirked at Risa and leaned in closer.
You have to pose for a fair for me.
Risa threw up her hands in defense.
Whoa. Wait a minute. What are you gonna do to me? You're not gonna hex me or voodoo me or something, right?
Relax, Risa. A fairth is a harmless spell. It's like a painting. But whereas a painting usually takes hours, days, or even weeks to finish, a fairth only takes a minute or 2. All you have to do is pose for me.
Oh, okay, sure. You got yourself a deal.
Excellent. Is there anything else you want to discuss? Because if not, I would kindly ask you to accompany me to the inn down the street that I'm staying at. We can make the fair there.
For the first time in a long time, Tanya gave the larger griffin a smug grin of her own.
Sure, I guess we can do that.
Risa gave the mage an uneasy nod as she got up and placed several copper pieces on the table.
Come on then.
Tanya stood up and led the drunken ranger out of the tavern. As the mage attempted to navigate her friend around the other patrons, she couldn't help but notice the poor lizard passed out on the floor and a couple of bears flocked in a pointless argument that seemed about 2 words away from turning violent. Risa pulled the hood of her cloak over her head and followed closely behind the mage.
How much further, Tanya?
Not far. It's just down the road.
The silent walk to the sleepy village was quiet and uneventful, plus very short. After entering the inn, greeting the innkeeper, and heading upstairs, Tanya set her book down and went over to a tan-collared pack sitting on her bed. She opened its main flap and withdrew a medium-sized stone tablet before tying it shut once more. It was a decent-sized tablet, much like the ones the mages would chisel runes into for creating barriers of protection or magic traps to ensnare thieves. She set it against the wall and turned to look at the ranger.
All right, Risa, go over to the wall, face me, and make whatever pose you like.
Risa nodded and tentatively walked over the wall before turning around. She gave a winking smile as she struck a pose, giving a thumbs up with one hand while she kept the other resting on her hip.
How's this?
The ranger then suddenly changed her pose and bent forward slightly to feign blowing a kiss.
Or this? Oh, maybe this one?
Risa changed her pose once more and made a pouty face as she brought the talon to her beak. She held the pose for a moment before shaking her head.
Nah, this one maybe?
The Griffiness gave a curt wink with a cheerful smile and stuck up 2 talons with one hand while keeping the other planted on her hip.
Yeah, I like this one.
Risa nodded with a grin as she settled into her pose.
So, how long is this gonna take anyway?
Tanya did not reply immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes and began to sign her fingers in various positions. Shortly after, a green aura surrounded the stone tablet. The young mage moved her fingers back and forth as the tablet began to rapidly chip away via the green aura surrounding it. Stone shedding began to fall to the floor at a speed which outmatched regular chisels by a vast margin, until, after only a minute or two after starting, she was done with the portrait. Tanya opened her eyes and studied the image. After a few extra tweaks here and there, she disbanded the spell with a smile.
Finished!
Tanya gave Risa a devious smirk as she examined the portrait.
Tanya, why are you looking at me that way?
Risa asked with a hint of nervousness. Magic in her experience always seemed to lead people into trouble, or at the very least cause troubles for others, which was reason enough to be cautious around it. Without a comment, Tanya picked up the tablet and turned it around. On it was a colored portrait of Risa. Sure enough, she was in the pose that she had picked out, but there was one key difference between the Faith's portrayal and Risa's physical pose. The Faith depicted the griffin's panties strapped to her chin. Tanya's image was that of the Griffiness in a massive atomic wedgie. Risa looked at the picture in shock before rolling her eyes and crossing her arms in a huff.
Oh, very funny, Tanya.
I thought so too.
Tanya set the portrait delicately inside her pack.
That is so going on my wall when I get back to the guild.
Risa stared down at the portrait with a deeply unamused frown as she watched Tanya pack it away. The ranger's eyes slowly trailed up from the portrait and fixed themselves on the back of the mage, who was currently in the process of undressing herself. Tanya dropped her hood, revealing a ponytail of long black feathers as she moved over to the night table next to the bed and set her dagger and coin pouch on the table. Risa blew a stray feather bang out of her eyes before moving over to the opposite corner of the room and following suit. Risa placed her cloak over a nearby chair, revealing an ensemble of weaponry that was previously disguised. A long sword attached to her hip, a series of 5 throwing knives attached to her shoulder harness, a dagger jutting out from her belt, and a mini crossbow holstered to one leg. Piece by piece she disrobed and unarmed herself until eventually only leaving herself clad in a simple shirt and pants.
Wow. Been wearing that stuff so long, it feels like I'm naked without it.
No wonder you're so muscular. If I had to carry that many weapons, I bet I'd be buff too.
Tanya removed the outer part of her robe, revealing a tan sleeveless shirt that matched her trousers and boots. Risa flexed her muscles in another pose, showing off her muscular physique.
Oh, you think so, huh? Well, thanks for the compliment. It's nice to hear all my training is finally paying off.
You're welcome. It's pretty late, so you can stay here if you like. There's only one bed, but I can sleep on the floor. I've done it before.
Oh, no worries. I think we could share the bed if you're cool with it, but I think we need to address something else first.
Risa slowly walked behind Tanya and approached the unassuming magpie from behind.
And what's that?
Tanya set her tone down on the table as she bent over to unlace her boots. Risa pounced on the opportunity and lurched forward, slipping her hands into her friend's pants before quickly latching onto the magpie's undergarments.
That there's no way I'm gonna let you just get away with making such a blackmailable picture of me without me having a little fun too.
Tanya froze as her blood ran cold. Her eyes widened as she glanced behind her and looked down at the talons currently lashed onto the white waistband trailing out from her pants. Risa smirked as she felt the mage instinctively clench her cheeks in preparation for the incoming prank. Just like the old times.
Come on, Risa. I was just having some fun. You really don't have to.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do.
Risa grinned mischievously as she curled her talons tightly around the magpie's waistband. She suddenly flicked her wrists upward just enough to get a small glimpse of her bray's panties.
Risa!
As Tanya's underwear slid out of her pants, Risa took a good long look at what she was working with. The mage's panties were solid white, a bit plain, but they had a single purple emblem on the rear. From what Risa could tell, it appeared to be the same crest adorning Tanya's robe. It was likely related to her guild in some form.
Oh my gosh. Is that your crest? Oh man, it is! That's hilarious! What, do they hand out honorary underwear if you become a member or something? And white granny panties too, by the look of them. I knew you all were nerds, but wow.
The guild issues clothes for all members of either gender, including underwear. We have to wear them. Please let me go.
I don't think so. Tell me, Tanya.
Risa continued to examine the mage's underpants.
Do you still remember all those years when I used to make you eat cotton? I used to ask you something. I think it was something like, what time is it? Well, do you know what time it is now?
Risa rolled her neck from side to side as she prepared to give the mother of all wedgies.
No.
Tanya shut her eyes as she felt the fabric get a bit tighter. Memories of her youth, especially her teen years with Risa, came flooding back to her.
Not again.
Oh yes, Tanya. Again.
Risa suddenly gave another sharp tug on the magpie's underwear.
So, you gonna tell me what time it is? Or do I have to jog your memory?
Risa emphasized her question with a few forceful tugs, pulling the mage up to her tiptoes to give her a hint, as well as to motivate her to play along despite how demeaning. Tanya gave a few extra squeaks of protest as she attempted to reach back and pry the waistband out of the ranger's iron grip.
Come on, Risa. Don't make me say it. It's embarrassing.
Well, sorry, kiddo, but that's just how things work. Otherwise, you'll just be making things worse for yourself.
Tanya's eyes widened in fear.
Fine, I'll say it. Just please, don't make whatever you're planning worse than it already is. It's wedgie time.
I'm sorry. Couldn't quite catch that.
I said it's wedgie time! Okay? It's wedgie time! I said so, just let me go already, Risa!
Tanya struggled and squirmed under the grasp of the Griffiness as she desperately tried to break Risa's hold on her underwear. Risa took a large step back and then yanked the waistband towards her hooks, consequently pulling the magpie's butt towards the Griffiness as well.
Oh, so you said it, but you're still resisting. That's new.
Risa raised an inquisitive brow at that.
Although I appreciate the effort, I think I'm gonna have to remind you how this thing works, sis. Allow me to show you. The hard way. Good thing that's just the way you like it. Time to give you the nerd special, courtesy of some good old-fashioned Griffin hospitality.
Risa gave a smug grin as she bent her knees and crouched slightly.
3, 2, 1, lift off!
In the blink of an eye, Risa launched upwards, her hands almost uppercutting the ceiling as she leapt as high as she could. The underwear in her talons screamed in a chorus of hot stitches as the waistband leapt up the poor bird's back. The fabric nearly reached Tanya's neck in one fell swoop, while simultaneously managing to sink into the magpie's nether regions. Tanya blushed hard as she felt her underwear become her worst nightmare. The mage kicked her legs frantically as she was suddenly lifted off the wooden floor. The cotton sheet of fabric creaked and groaned as it strained itself to stretch as far as it could without ripping. Even her trousers threatened to betray her dignity as they gave a cute outline of the magpie's plump behind. Risa landed back on the floor with a soft thud, but kept her arms raised up to hold the poor mage in the air for a few more moments, letting her dangle a good 2 to 3 feet off the floor just by her underpants alone.
How's the weather up there, bird butt?
My ass is on fire.
Like music to my ears. Let's see how you like this one.
Risa lowered Tanya down to where her scaled toes were just scraping the floor as the Griffiness brought her elbows to her sides and kept her forearms parallel with the ground. Then, in a quick fluid motion, she brought the waistband up to her chest before slowly lowering it back down to its earlier position. She repeated the motion again a second time, and then a third.
Time for a wedgie workout. Yeah! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Each curl brought the delicates higher and higher up Tanya's neck, while also exploring every nook and cranny in the poor bird's nethers.
6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, feel the burn. 10, 11, 12. No pain, no gain. 13, 14, and 15.
Risa dropped Tanya over the bed.
That was a real smoker. You're heavier than you look.
Tanya's blush was now beet red, as her granny panties were wedged firmly up her nether regions. The underpants looked more like an extended beaver tail by the end of the ranger's torturous bonding session. The mage, still recovering from the brutal wedgie, remained on her front for several minutes afterwards. The exhausted magpie looked like a mass of black feathers and a white tan fabric, her tail feathers draped over her back limply.
My crotch! Oh!
Not done yet.
Risa grunted as she deftly past the mage and left the embarrassed magpie holding onto the bed for dear life in just her skivvies.
Wow, look at these bad boys. Bet you could even parachute out of these things.
Risa spread out the sorely stretched undergarments over Tanya's back and shoulders to get a better look at the damage she just dealt.
Hey, are you tasting cotton yet? 'Cause it looks like I'm pulling these things through your freaking body, girl. Jeez, they built these babies to last, didn't they? Well, better make the most out of that opportunity.
Risa grabbed herself another handful of cotton. Risa grabbed the leg holes for a little extra stretching and pulled them high and tight, letting what was left of the fabric sink into Tanya's abused backside. The ranger gave a few more rougher than usual yanks to pop the rest of the stitches out. In a series of chords, the stitches snapped almost in tune to one tearing through a tunic. With her friend's pants sagging around her ankles, Risa inadvertently set herself up to get mooned for her troubles. Not that she cared all that much. The idea was to ruffle the bird's feathers. Whatever further that agenda was fair game, until she was done making her point with her prey. Tanya's black feathered cheeks jiggled at the griffin's paws with every tug. The fabric easily jumped to Tanya's shoulders in just a few short yanks. As Tanya groaned and squealed at every pull, Risa was reminded of the typical Tuesday night get-togethers the two of them used to pull when they were teens. Risa gave a couple of cheeky swats to Tanya's derriere in an attempt to get a reaction out of her.
Gotta tenderize this little bird nerd.
In an attempt to add insult to injury, Risa went to town on Tanya's backside and smacked her rear end like a pair of bongos. Each slap caused the magpie to jolt with a yelp slightly as she was firmly put in her place.
Ow! Hey, stop it!
Tanya's feathered behind jiggled under the force from every blow to her backside. The magpie held on to the bed with a death grip as Risa effectively tanned her hide. Truth be told, the large griffiness was actually enjoying the little spanking she was currently dishing out along with her little bonding session. She reveled in every second of it as she re-established the pecking order between the two of them, just in case the younger mage had actually forgotten who was the boss. The ranger's swats came down a little harder now, just enough to water the magpie's eyes a bit, but not hard enough to cause her to start crying. She wanted to remind little Tanya of exactly who she was dealing with before she even thought of sharing that embarrassing picture of her to someone else. And if pulling the poor girl's undies around was the easiest way to do it, then so be it. The spanking was just because she knew she could get away with it, and maybe also because she was a bit jealous of the mage's way more shapely backside.
Bet it's been a while since you got your ass smacked around like this, huh?
Ow!
Tanya closed her eyes and clenched her beak. Her cheeks were burning. In their youth, Tanya had never had the strength to fight back, and she still didn't. Physically, at least. Risa, finally satisfied with her spanking, grabbed the gusset of Tanya's panties and gave a harsh yank upwards. Several stitches popped again as the seat portion of the underwear stretched to its maximum limit. She'd done it. The magpie's undergarments were now thoroughly stretched and ready for phase 2.
Are you ready for your new hat, my little nerdlet? 'Cause ready or not, here it comes.
Risa gave Tanya a moment to process what was about to happen to her as the griffiness grabbed the magpie's waistband yet again. Tanya squirmed around a bit more and even let out a squawk or two from the yank. She was reaching back once more, not to stop Risa this time, but to desperately protect her sore behind. She was utterly humiliated once again, but to her credit, she actually seemed to have taken that wedgie spanking combo a lot better than she had in her teen years. However, even with all that said, she was still the nerd to Risa's bully. Risa slowly pulled the waistband higher and higher, dragging the cotton fabric along Tanya's head feathers so the magpie could feel the entire progress of the underwear. Risa eventually stopped at the crown of the magpie's head. She then quickly rubbed the poor girl's panties back and forth in a noogie-like fashion in an attempt to ruffle the magpie's feathers. The ranger continued, pulling slowly yet firmly, giving the underwear no choice but to relent and keep stretching despite its groans. And stretch it did. 3 inches, then 9 inches, until she had pulled the panties a good 12 or 15 inches past the poor girl's head. The strain on the underwear was intense. It didn't help that the griffiness was leaning on top of her over the bed, effectively pinning her down under her weight. Risa laughed at the struggling mage underneath her. She always enjoyed this part of re-establishing the pecking order. establishing who was in charge, putting others in their place, lording it over them whenever she got the chance. Risa had to admit she was probably abusing the use of the avian social hierarchy a bit, but it wasn't like anyone was going to stop her. She, of course, was only halfway up the chain herself, and so consequently had her own awkward encounters from time to time, but they were few and far between. And Risa made extra sure to give such individuals a wide berth and ample amounts of respect and submission as expected. Tanya, on the other hand, sweet as she was, still liked to push her boundaries to see what she could get away with regarding those considered higher up in the chain than herself. This often prompted the Griffiness to act accordingly, or otherwise risk losing her place in the pecking order, and she just couldn't have that. That normally meant a duel would be in order. Now, in most families where such matters were allowed to take place, a fight of both strength and wit would occur between clashing parties. At the conclusion of said duel, a verbal admission of submission would be heard from the loser, giving the losing party a large dose of humble pie. But since Risa always had a personal disliking to physically beating up opponents weaker than her, the Griffin figured there had to be alternatives to beating the crap out of her sister, and thus, her use of wedgies as an act of both dominance and stress relief was born. The method proved useful, acting both as a means to dominate the mage in an act of strength, while also giving the magpie a large dose of humility with every yank she administered. But above all, it was entertaining. It was far better than fighting fist over claw to establish dominance over who would be in charge in any case. Risa moved the waistband forward a bit, so Tanya could see her impending panty mask looming over her.
Any last words, my little bird nerd?
Risa gave Tanya a few tugs, prompting the magpie to say her last words. Tanya's groaning stopped as she looked up at the stretched white fabric about to cover her face. She knew that it was very likely that she was about to spend the entire night in a massive atomic wedgie. It wouldn't really surprise her. Risa always did this kind of stuff when they were younger. Of course, that wasn't any source of comfort to the mage at the moment. Tanya mentally patted herself on the back for remembering to pack extra underpants before meeting the Griffin Ranger. Tanya managed to offer up her best defiant face as she grunted out the phrase that Risa had heard many times at the end of their little bonding sessions as teens.
You suck.
Risa smiled back at the mage with a shrug.
Here's a life lesson for you, if you haven't learned it yet, Tanya. Life sucks. Every day is like one big, constant wedgie. And we just grit our teeth and take it. If I gotta deal with the pecking order, then so do you. It's nothing personal. It's just the way things are. So no reason to get your panties in a twist. Which reminds me, time for your new hat!
Risa gave Tanya a face of mock surprise as she lowered the 12+ inches of panty cotton over the bird's face. Tanya could see every second of her vision being obscured by her own underpants before the waistband was finally secured past her beak and over her chin. To add further insult to injury, Risa grabbed the mage's hands and held them behind her back before taking a pair of binding cuffs from her pants pocket and securing them.
And there we go. That's one wedgied bird nerd.
Tanya squirmed and writhed around on the bed once more. It was futile to try and free herself, and she knew even if she could free herself, Risa wasn't going to let her up until the Griffin was satisfied with getting her stupid point across. It was more an attempt to lessen her discomfort than anything else. An outline of the bird's eyes and beak were visible through the stretched white fabric, and the magpie's talons opened and closed as she struggled against the cuffs. Risa got off her friend and took a step back to examine her work.
Not bad. Not bad at all, I'd say. What do you think, Tanya?
Risa raised a hand to her ear as if to listen.
Yeah, great.
You haven't lost your touch. Whoopee.
Tanya began to arch her back as best as she could, something she always did to lessen the pain of one of Risa's patented undie-tugging prank session. The lack of pants and a robe also gave the griffin a bit of a glance at her friend's overall form. Whereas previously the magpie had been a lanky, not very physically fit girl, she now had hints of muscle and tone in her legs, glutes, and arms. Although still not near the level of fitness as the ranger herself, it seemed whatever the Mage's guild had Tanya doing had toned up the magpie's body, if only just a bit. Risa went around the front of Tanya, reached over and peeled back the bird's waistband, and held it just few inches above the magpie's head.
All right, Tanya. I hope I got the point across here about that little piece of blackmail you got now.
Risa paused to let her friend mull over what had just happened to her, and the threat that it would happen again, but even worse if she decided to one day use the portrait against the ranger. Tanya shifted underneath her panty canopy and looked up at Risa, who was still currently holding on to her unmentionables.
Yeah. No blackmail. Got it.
Good. And don't you forget it.
With that, Risa lowered the underwear and resecured it over Tanya's beak.
Wait, no! I said I got the...
Good night, Tanya.
Risa snickered to herself as Tanya began squirming around once more. The magpie was nothing if not perseverant.
Okay. I'm not gonna leave you like that all night.
Risa said with a roll of her eyes, as if that should have been obvious from the very start.
I just wanted to get you all flustered one last time, so I could see that cute pouty face you make when you freak out. Come on. I wouldn't leave you hanging like that, girl buddy.
Risa spoke with a hint of sincerity as she went to work releasing Tanya from her cuffs and discarding them on the floor.
I think you can manage the rest.
She said with a dismissive wave of her hand as she let Tanya situate herself.
Ugh, so gross.
Tanya shuddered as she quickly peeled off the panties of her face and let go of the waistband, allowing the white garment to snap back to her waist. Relieved to be breathing fresh air again, Tanya got off the bed and began the process of readjusting her stretched-out underwear as she attempted to de-wedge herself.
Well, that's another pair you've managed to ruin.
Did you get most of it out yet, or do you need some help back there or something?
The younger mage grumbled something under her breath as she continued to awkwardly readjust her unmentionables. Risa smirked, served the girl right for making such an embarrassing portrait of her after all. Still, though, she did feel kinda bad about it. After all, Tanya was her closest friend, her best friend, now that she really thought about it. And on top of that, they were family. In fact, the pair had been nearly inseparable as chicks growing up. Risa frowned slightly as she considered whether or not she might have gone just a tad bit too far this time, considering it was Tanya's first day back and all. The griffin weighed the thought in her mind a bit before deciding it best to apologize, just in case she was about to burn a significant bridge.
Hey, I'm sorry if I went a little too rough on you just then. Things kinda got a little too crazy back there. I didn't mean to go as far as I did.
Tanya gave Risa a strange look.
Okay. Who are you, and what have you done with Risa? Because Risa doesn't apologize.
Tanya asserted with an accusing stare. Risa put her hands up defensively.
No, I mean it. I wanted to make a point, but I think I went a bit overkill.
Oh, yeah? You think?
Tanya rolled her eyes, placing her hands on her hips. Yep, she was pretty peeved, all right.
Yeah, that one's my bad. Like I said, sorry.
Risa scratched the back of her head sheepishly, not knowing what else to say. Tanya felt her hand subconsciously moving towards the backside to rub her sore bum.
Those are new panties, Well, at least you actually apologized for once. That's a step in the right direction, at the very least. I'm still mad at you, though.
Yeah, that's fair.
Risa gave a shrug as she figured that would probably be the case after a session like that.
Tell you what, I'll make it up to you. What do you want?
Anything?
Tanya asked as she gave the griffin a sidelong look with a discerning stare. Risa was 2 seconds away from putting herself in a hole she wouldn't be digging herself out of anytime soon, and she knew it.
Yeah, anything. Whatever you want.
Tanya tapped her beak reflectively for a moment as she thought the offer over.
Okay. I'll take an IOU. Anytime, any place, anywhere. You have to do what I say when I say. No ifs and or buts. Promise?
Risa's shoulders drooped as the griffin simultaneously flung her head back to stare up at the ceiling and to let out a groan before looking back at Tanya.
Okay, fine. I promise. Griffin's honor. We good?
Tanya nodded and shook the griffin's hand with a cheeky smile.
Of course, Risa. We'll always be good. That said, I am so getting you back for this.
Risa rolled her eyes with a chuckle as she fixed the magpie with a beaming grin.
I think I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Nerdbird. But, with all that said, I think it's time we finally get some shut-eye if we want to get up on time tomorrow.
Risa said as she slipped out of her pants, revealing a pair of white bikini panties with pink elastic along the waistband and leg holes. On the front, a trail of 4 sky blue feline paw prints led out from the crotch, trailing over towards the side of the leg band. As Risa turned around to pile her clothes in the corner of the room, Tanya noticed the back of the griffin's underwear was the face of a sky blue-colored feral kitten, smiling happily as it took up nearly a third of the space on the underwear. Tanya's eyes widened in surprise at the ranger's previously unknown taste in apparel. With a grin, she opened her beak to say something to tease the griffin, but quickly thought better of it, choosing instead to close her mouth and remain silent. As bad as Tanya wanted to call out Risa's gaudy taste in underwear, it just wasn't worth the risk of angering the older griffin, especially one so adept at being able to turn one's own underwear into one's worst nightmare. Wisely, the magpie kept her beak shut and bit her tongue to prevent herself from getting into any more hot water with the ranger as the two got ready for bed.
Yeah, I suppose you're right, Risa. It is getting rather late after all.
Tanya proceeded to crawl back onto the bed and get under the covers. Risa more or less followed suit after extinguishing the lantern and settling down for the night. And with that, the 2 merry adventurers settled down for the night as they prepared for the journey ahead.